and welcome to tonight's Bible study. Tonight we pick up in Matthew chapter 2, verse 13 through 23, and we will read the rest of the story about the wise men or the Magi's and Joseph fleeing. It said, picking up in verse 13, it says, "When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. 'Get up,' he said, 'take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him.' So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophets, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.' When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. 'A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more.' After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, 'Get up and take the child and mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who are trying to take the child's life are dead.' So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he learned that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene." Several important things in a very short passage. We started pointing out from the genealogy of Jesus that Joseph was of the line and lineage of David. And we see Joseph came back again, and he's being warned in a dream, just like his ancestor, Joseph, the famous Joseph, being warned about in dreams. And so we see here that Joseph is warned by God in a dream to get up and to flee. And that part of the story is easy to understand. So picking up at verse 13, it says, "When they had gone, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph." So once the Magi's, the wise men, were gone, and as I mentioned, there were probably more than three. We used three because of the gifts. The Magi's were warned by God to go another way, and Joseph was warned, and he flees. And we see that this is also a fulfillment of Scripture. Many things that we see in this Scripture is fulfillment. And for us, we think of Scripture as both Old and New Testament as Christians. But at this point in time, the only Scripture they have is what we would call Old Testament. And it's a fulfillment, and we see here several prophets. For example, here, it said from straight out of the prophets, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So Jesus had to be born in Bethlehem, and we see in Luke, for example, that Joseph was not living in Bethlehem at the time, and in order for Jesus to be born there, he had to be forced to move, because nobody do things unless they have to. And I want for us to hear that. Nobody does things unless they have to do it. For example, the people who are fleeing Ukraine right now because of the war are fleeing because they have to. It's either that or they get their houses got destroyed or bombed, or they would be killed, and so they flee. People that are refugees all throughout the world. People that came to America. For example, I was born in Belize. One of the reasons that we came to America was because it's a better life. People move because they have a reason to move. And the biggest motivator is when you have to move. And we see that Joseph got warned in a dream that, the child and his mother was going to be killed, because Herod was going to search for the child and kill him. I mean, big motivation. Um, you know, Basically, the devil is trying to end uh, the story right then and there, and is using whatever means. But even at that, we see that God is still in charge, and that's the point here that I want to make, is God is still in charge. God was in charge with the virgin birth, was in charge with Joseph. He knew Joseph was a righteous man. He did not divorce Mary. He did not have her stoned to death. Um, he was also the man that would provide for Joseph, for Jesus, and care for him. We see for years, Jesus was quite, older, a teenager, but, and Joseph was still around. So he was a father figure that, provided for him, for food, clothes, shelter, etc. Um, and Here we see Joseph providing that figure of protection. He got Mary, who and the child, and we want to make sure that we know that this is a child, that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Joseph and Mary, being from Bethlehem, stayed there, was living there, was planning to live there and as I mentioned, Jesus was not born on AD 1, or there's no 0 AD, folks. He was probably born 6 BC. And the reason we know that is going to be seen tonight. Is Herod, the Great, died in 4 BC. So if Herod died in 4 BC, Jesus had to be born at least 4 BC. And we then pick up another clue today that Herod was furious, verse 16, when he realized he had been outwitted by the Magi's, by the wise men. He was furious, and he gave orders for all the baby boys, for he knew that it was a king, male boy, to be killed that were 2 years and under. So Jesus could be up to 2, he could be 1, or he could be, a newborn. But at this point, we call him a child, so we know he's over 1. So Jesus has to be born in at least 5 BC, more likely 6 BC. And Herod said 2 or under, and the scripture makes it quite clear, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. And we have to remember that today, for example, we can go in one day, from New York to London, or from New York to Los Angeles. It's a quick flight, and when the Concorde was around, it was a really fast flight, less than 4 hours. Back then, in order for them to travel any distance, it would take months. And so the wise men saw the star, and they came to worship, and by the time they got there, it was months, more than likely years, because we don't know how many wise men, and we don't know exactly where they came from. The scripture just said from the east, and the east is probably Babylon, Persia, India. We don't know. But the wise men came, they were warned, and the reason we use that they were wise men and Magi is they were smart. They studied the stars. They were the astrologers. So they weren't, so they were intelligent human beings who studied the stars, saw the star and what was happening in the sky, saw that it was, for the Jews, and this was a king star, etc. And so Herod asked them question, and it was 2 years that they've been on this journey. They saw the star. So any child 2 years or younger was killed. So here we have many things in play. The wise men who came to worship him. Herod, who claimed that he wanted to worship him, but his real intention was to do what? To kill him. And here we see is people's motive. The wise men came to worship him because they saw him as the new king of the Jews, and that was an important thing to, for them to do, and they brought gifts. Herod, on the other hand, rather than wanting to worship him as he claimed, he wanted to kill him. And he tried to use, because here's the truth. People who are in power don't want to ever give up power. And I want to repeat that. People who are in power never want to give up power. Um, uh, Kings were kings, and they passed on the power to their children, and their children were king, and then they pass it on to their kids, and so power, was something that you kept close and in the family, and Herod understood that, and they never wanted to give up power. America is a unique place where when a president loses, they step aside. It's unfortunately that a year and a half ago, we had that whole incident about January 6th, about a president not wanting to step aside and using laws to circumvent. But the reality is, we are a unique country. Presidents and people don't usually want to set aside, give up their power. And so Herod is no exception, as a human being. And we see Herod wanted not to worship Jesus, not to worship the new king of the Jews, but to kill him. And we see immediately, shortly after he did this killing of the kids, babies, children, 2 years and under, all the boys in Bethlehem and in the immediate vicinity. At first, he sent the wise men to find the one child and just wanted to kill the one. But when he realized he was outwitted, he wanted to kill. Let's get rid of all the male childs around there, so that we can guarantee that this king of the Jews got killed. Unfortunately, as we know, Joseph was warned, and Jesus did live, or I should say, fortunately, Joseph was warned, because again, God is in charge. But again, even with what Herod did, it's a fulfillment of Scripture. The Bible makes it quite clear. This is what was said through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. The fact they're mourning is we mourn for people who died. And Rachel is a mother. It's the mother of Joseph. It's Jacob's wife, Rachel. And the beloved children they have, Joseph and Benjamin. And we know that, for example, in the story, that Joseph was lost. He was sold into slavery, and she wept in Ramah for losing her beloved son, Joseph. And here we see this is a fulfillment of Scripture again. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning. When Joseph's brother sold him into slavery and went back home and told the father, that he was killed by a wild animal and eaten, could you imagine his mother crying for the loss of a child? And so here we see that this Scripture is fulfilled, that Rachel, the mother figure, is heard crying and weeping and mourning, and she's weeping specifically for her children. So all the kids, the little children, 2 years and under, were killed. And she was refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Herod ruthlessly went about and systematically killed the kids, again, to retain power. I think about the war in Ukraine and how Russia bombed even that building that had, children, that theater, Again, ruthless, powerful people don't want to give up power. And we see that with despots, be it Herod, be it Putin, be it Hitler. Dictators want to keep power, and the more power they have, the more they want, and they don't care who gets hurt, including women and children. And so even the worst things that happen in Scripture, God is still in charge. And that gives me comfort today as I think about the war in Ukraine, that God is still in charge. Putin is a human being. I hear all these crazy things, that there's a plot on his life, that he's sick and going to die. The reality is, we know that one day he'll die. He's a human being, and that he will be answerable to God for what he's doing. All despots, all dictators, including Herod, will one day die. And that's just the reality of life. And so we see that even in the Bible, that it picks up again, picking up at verse 19. It said, after Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph and told him in a dream, it's okay to go back, to get the child and his mother and go back to the land of Israel. And for those who are trying to kill the child are no more. They're dead. Death doesn't matter who you are. Most powerful man that have big armies like Putin right now, or Herod, one day they will all die. So, that's the way life is. God will call him into account. We see that now Joseph then returned. So Joseph got up in verse 21, took the child and his mother, and returned to the land of Israel. But when he had heard that Archelaus, one of Herod's sons, was ruling over Judea, he decided, nope, I'm not going to go there because Archelaus is as mean and as vicious as his father. And if he heard that I've returned, and this is the child that's going to be the king of the Jews, and he has returned to Bethlehem area, and it's a child of that age, if he do a little investigating, he might want to kill him. So the scripture said he went to Nazareth in Galilee. And again, Joseph moved because he was afraid of Archelaus. But his intent was to go back to Bethlehem. That's where he's from. He wanted to go back. He had friends and family and who knows what else. They were living there a year plus before they had to flee. And so it was natural for him to return to where he had a house and thing. But instead he goes to Nazareth and start a new life. But even there we see that God is in charge. And we see that is the case because the scripture goes on. It says, and he went to live in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. So we don't have any Old Testament where, that he would be called a Nazarene. We have other tradition. And so here we see that, again, Matthew is trying to make it quite clear to everybody that God is in charge, that scripture is being fulfilled. The fact that he had to flee to Egypt and that my son will be called out of Egypt. The fact that Herod would kill all these kids, fulfillment, at Rachel weeping. The fact that Joseph would return with the mother and child, and instead of returning where you expect them to go to, they return to Nazareth, and the child would be called, from Nazareth, a Nazarene. Over and over again we see ultimately God is in charge and that scripture is being fulfilled. And I think that it's not only Jesus' life but our lives. God is ultimately in charge of our life, and things happen. COVID happened, and we have the United Methodist Church right now with all its problems. God is still in charge. People will do things like Herod, like Putin, but even them, God is in charge. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know today, tomorrow. I still don't even understand last week. I skipped last week because I was at the general conference or the conference for the United Methodists. I didn't understand everything that they did. I didn't agree with everything they did. But again, I have faith that God is in charge. And that's what we need to understand from this, is in life as we face today, tomorrow, next year, next month, whatever the future holds, whatever event happened to us, God is ultimately in charge. And I can say that because, I've looked at my life and I look over the journey from Belize to Texas to Minnesota, from never thinking of doing prison ministry to doing prison ministry, now to being a pastor. God has been in charge. And I could say, I would probably have chosen differently, but I trust God to lead. As Christians, we say, God, we will lead wherever you follow. And whenever God nudges, like he did with Joseph, take Mary as your wife, as he did with Joseph, flee from and go to Egypt. And as he did, return. Whatever God leads, the question is, are we going to be like Joseph, and are we going to be obedient and follow? And even when bad things happen, like Herod killing the kids, ultimately, God is still in charge. And so whenever good things or bad things happen, my view is, God is in charge. I will follow him and do his will. And that's my lesson today is, folks, God is in charge. I like you make plans, but my plans sometimes change because God leads us in different ways. Um, right now, I serve at Ottertail Joyful Spirit. Last year, I was serving Richville Ottertail. I loved serving Richville Ottertail. God is in charge. Wherever he leads, we as like Joseph, like all Christians, God is in charge. We follow. We'll pick up there next week with Jesus as an adult. I mean, almost 30, 20, 28, 29 years later with John the Baptist. So we'll pick up there next week. Thank you.